You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us. Hi, I'm Annie from Massachusetts in the USA.
And I'm Johanna from Austria, and you're listening to your favorite international podcast. Welcome back if you're a regular listener, and a warm welcome if this is your first time joining us. We're thrilled you found us and that you've taken the time to tune into our discussions about stories that delve into the murderous, mysterious, and macabre side of life.
As always, we want to extend a huge shout out to all of our Patreon members, all of you who take the time to write to us or leave us a rating or review. We just appreciate it so much. Thank you for supporting our little podcast.
Yes, thank you so much indeed.
If you're new to the podcast and this is your first episode, we are two online friends who have never actually met in person. We were supposed to meet in 2020, but obviously that's now a whole thing. So yeah, 5 years of podcasting together, but we have never actually met. If you enjoy today's episode and decide to stick around, you might find yourself diving into our backlog, where you'll get to know us pretty well. Sometimes we laugh, sometimes we cry. I feel like I cry a lot on this podcast. I'm sorry.
You cried so much.
Oh, so much. And sometimes we stumble over pronunciations of things, places, people.
Sometimes.
All the time. Just remember, everybody who mispronounces a word learned that word by reading it, not hearing it. So it's fine.
But also, often it's words that we know how to pronounce properly before we start recording.
Yeah, don't even get me started with
it's the
archipelago. Archipelago.
Don't.
Shit. So, anyhow, every week, thanks to the magic of modern-day technology and Johanna's very clever editing skills, we come together online and explore fascinating cases from all corners of the globe.
That's all correct, everything you said there, but I have to say something to our listeners. If this is your first episode, you should actually stop right now and listen to the 3 previous episodes beforehand, because it gives you some background info on Jim Jones, his upbringing, the People's Temple, and the reason for the move to Guyana.
That's right. And so finally today, we're going to be discussing daily life in Jonestown, and of course, the events leading up to the massacre and the aftermath. So we have a lot to talk about it, and we should probably get right into it. So last week we told you how the People's Temple moved over 1,000 people to Guyana to establish the People's Temple Agricultural Project. Jim Jones and his family arrived in early 1977. They were one of the last to arrive in Jonestown after the majority of the members had already settled and begun setting up the community. By the time Jones arrived, the initial group of pioneers had already been working on clearing land, constructing buildings, and establishing the basic infrastructure in the remote jungle of Guyana.
I don't think it surprises anyone that Jim Jones wasn't in the first group, wasn't there sleeping in a makeshift tent and chopping down trees.
Yeah, no self-respecting cult leader is going to do the work himself, am I right? That's part of the gig, isn't it? His arrival brought intensified control and leadership to Jonestown, influencing its development and daily operations significantly. So let's take a closer look at how daily life unfolded in this isolated jungle settlement. The residents of Jonestown lived in communal housing, where families and individuals shared living quarters and facilities. Housing units were basic, consisting of wooden cabins with minimal furnishings, reflecting the communal ethos of the community. Each day in Jonestown was structured around collective activities aimed at self-sufficiency and community cohesion. Work assignments were mandatory for all residents, ranging from agricultural tasks in the fields to maintenance work around the settlement. The community operated its own agricultural projects, growing crops and raising livestock to provide food for its members. Education was also a priority in Jonestown. Children attended classes where they were taught a curriculum that included academic subjects, as well as lessons in socialism and communal living principles. There were, by the way, over 300 children in the settlement. But education wasn't only for the young ones. Adults participated in educational programs focused on self-improvement and political ideology, reflecting Jim Jones's socialist vision. Despite the challenges of living in a remote jungle environment, Jonestown had its own medical clinic staffed by volunteer healthcare workers. Basic healthcare services were provided to residents, although resources were limited and medical emergencies posed significant challenges due to the settlement's isolation.
God, can you imagine having a life and death emergency there? Like, I don't know, ruptured appendix? Although, I mean, we talked about cutting out your own appendix before already. We know how that works.
Yeah, with some kind of work accident, probably. They do so much physical labor, farming, construction. There's just no way that there weren't serious accidents during all of this.
Yeah. As far as I read, if the numbers are correct that I saw on the jonestown.sdsu.edu, I think it's the homepage, they have a lot of statistics there, and I think it was 8 or 9 deaths. I don't have the exact numbers for the accidents, but there were reports of several accidents and incidents, obviously, in Jonestown, particularly during the construction and agricultural work. Accidents were definitely not uncommon. Some of the reported incidents included injuries from machinery, falls, or any other work-related mishaps. Apparently, specific detailed records of these accidents and their exact frequency are not really documented.
Yeah, maybe this was before the invention of those signs at the workplace that say, it's been 0 days since our last accidental death. You know, I don't think they had one of those. Social and recreational activities were also a really important part of life in Jonestown. Residents gathered for communal meals, meetings, and cultural events where they would sing, dance, and perform theatrical productions. These activities fostered a sense of community spirit and camaraderie among the residents. The heart of the settlement was the so-called pavilion, and it was called that because it was a pavilion. I mean, there's not a lot of... Yeah, this is the pavilion. It's a pavilion.
To be fair, the pavilion in Jonestown wasn't just a structure. It was, as Annie said, the heart of the community, a place where every aspect of life unfolded. And always under the watchful eye of Jim Jones. He was sitting in his chair there in the pavilion whenever there was something going on. Now, imagine a sprawling jungle settlement where the pavilion served as a central gathering spot. Here, the entire community would come together for meetings, assemblies, and announcements. It was a space where Jim Jones delivered his very passionate speeches, rallying his followers with promises of a better life. But it wasn't just business, the pavilion also hosted cultural and social events. There, the residents gathered for aforementioned musical performances, dance rehearsals, theatrical productions. These moments fostered the sense of unity and camaraderie among the residents, shaping their shared identity in this very remote corner of the world. And of course, every week the pavilion echoed with the sounds of hymns and prayers during religious services, led, of course, by Jim Jones. Here, baptisms were solemnized, marking significant milestones in the lives of Jonestown residents. I read different numbers when it comes to children being born in Jonestown. The numbers range somewhere between 30 and 70. I think during the massacre there were 33 babies at Jonestown.
And the pavilion is where everything important to the community would have taken place. All of these ceremonies, from celebrations of life to memorials, that all would have been there.
But the pavilion also served a darker purpose. It was here that Jim Jones conducted propaganda sessions, wielding his charisma and rhetoric to sway hearts and minds. His speeches were more than just words, they were tools of psychological manipulations, shaping the beliefs and loyalties of those who listened. Loyalty tests and psychological exercises were commonplace at the pavilion. Jones used these tactics to maintain control, ensuring unwavering allegiance from his followers. The pavilion became a stage where the boundaries between truth and manipulation blurred, reinforcing Jones's grip on the community. And ultimately, the pavilion symbolized Jim Jones' authority over Jonestown. His presence there underscored his leadership and control, shaping the community's identity and destiny. But as the pressures mounted and scrutiny intensified, the pavilion would bear witness to a tragic and irreversible turn of events.
The pavilion was also where Jim Jones would gather his followers during the so-called White Nights. These are terrible. So the White Nights, it's white, NIGHTS, were essentially drills for mass suicide. You had mentioned loyalty tests, and now we're going to just explain what that meant a bit more, because it's so much worse than you think. It was basically a way to prepare the community for potential attacks or invasions that Jones claimed were imminent. At their core, these rehearsals were tools for Jones to instill fear, test loyalty, and maintain an iron grip over the residents of Jonestown. But just imagine it, if you will. It's been a really hard day's work in the jungle of Guyana. You are exhausted and hot and sweaty and probably covered in mosquito bites. And so you go to the communal hut you're living in and you pass out, you're exhausted. And you're doing your best to fall asleep even though it's hot and humid. And you can hear the mosquitoes and the monkeys and, it's terrible. And all your hutmates are snoring, but it's fine. You fall fast asleep because you're just beat. And then the speakers that are installed all over the settlement come on crackling, and you hear the voice of your methed up leader yelling, "White Knight! White Knight!" And so now you're about ready to strangle this dude with your bare hands because now you have to get back up and schlep yourself over to the pavilion for whatever nonsense he's going to make you participate in. And what would happen during a White Night is Jones would summon the entire community to the central pavilion, very often in the middle of the night, with this very sudden and dramatic call, which added to the tension and the urgency. Then once they're all gathered at the pavilion, Jones would deliver this impassioned speech about the threats facing Jonestown. He would describe imaginary enemies or conspiracies that obviously never really happened, claiming that the only way to resist capture or oppression was through, quote-unquote, revolutionary suicide. In these sessions, residents were sometimes given cups of liquid that they were told contained poison. They were instructed to drink the liquid as a demonstration of their loyalty and readiness to die for the cause. Although the liquid was usually harmless, residents were often unaware of this fact, adding to the psychological terror.
This is torture. This is torture.
Yeah.
I really think it's important to remember that, and we said it last week already, these people were completely isolated, sleep-deprived, and whipped up by Jones into a frenzy and paranoia. I don't really remember. Do we know how often these White Nights occurred?
It depends on who you ask and what you mean by a White Night, because there were different levels of escalation. Some of the former members recalled that there were only 2 or 3 White Nights in Jonestown, and during these very intense periods, the community armed itself with whatever weapons they had, guns, tools like shovels, hoes, even just sticks. They stayed awake for days, prepared to defend their promised land from perceived threats like the Guyana Defense Force, mercenaries, or hostile relatives. I think it's interesting that hostile relatives became part of the zeitgeist, and they were ready to fight to the death if necessary. Others that you would talk to remember about a dozen White Nights, and they remember these as community meetings where individuals would step forward to the microphone and pledge their willingness to die for the cause, even that night if needed. So these gatherings served to reinforce the residents' loyalty and commitment to Jones's vision. There's another group of former members, and they describe White Nights happening almost every week. These were nights when Jones would keep the community up all night discussing problems and concerns. He invoked the term White Night to keep everyone focused and awake, using it as a tool to maintain control and ensure the community's constant vigilance. Finally, some say that a White Night happened every time Jones mentioned death during a community meeting. Under this broad definition, there could have been nearly 100 White Nights, as Jones frequently spoke about death. His own, the communities, their enemies, and the potential consequences for Jonestown. However, I think we both agree that this definition sort of dilutes the term's meaning because death was a recurring theme in pretty much every meeting held in that jungle encampment.
I mean, no matter how exactly the concept of White Nights were defined, I think it's needless to say that it was used to create a pervasive atmosphere of fear, control, and psychological manipulation in Jonestown. And the various definitions show how Jim Jones used the term to maintain an omnipresent sense of crisis and readiness among his followers. Also, it kind of shows a little bit of this, there was no rhyme or reason. If people can't even agree on what a White Night even was, then it was all kind of random in a way.
Yeah, I think it was all meant to create chaos and confusion. So it's not surprising that nobody really knows what the hell was going on.
Yeah, so whether it was preparing for an imminent attack or pledging their life to the cause or simply staying up all night to address concerns, the residents of Jonestown lived under this constant shadow and threat of potential disaster. But Also, understanding the White Nights is crucial to comprehending the tragic events that unfolded in Jonestown. I think we can call the 18th of November 1978 the final White Night.
Yeah.
I think now it's time to talk about the inevitable, right? The massacre of over 900 people. But to get there, we need to talk about the days leading up to it, and we need to talk about the visit of Congressman Leo Ryan in November of 1978. Leo Joseph Ryan Jr. was born on 5th of May 1925 in Lincoln, Nebraska, and his family later moved to Massachusetts. Did you know that, Annie?
I didn't. I don't think he lived here long, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. He attended high school there, and then he served in the U.S. Navy during World War II before pursuing higher education. And he earned a bachelor's degree from a university in Omaha, in Nebraska, and a master's degree from the same institution. And then after completing his education, Ryan moved to California, where he began a career in education, which was surprising to me because I thought he went for politics straight away. But no, he worked as a high school teacher and administrator in the South San Francisco Unified School District. His work in education sparked his interest in politics, though, particularly in issues related to social justice and government accountability. Ryan's political career began at the local level. He served on the City Council of South San Francisco and later as the mayor. In 1962, he was elected to the California State Assembly, and from all I read about him, he seems to have been the kind of politician one could only hope for.
Yeah.
He was known for his hands-on approach and dedication to his constituents, and he wasn't afraid to take unconventional steps to understand the issue he was tackling. There is one notable example of this. He went undercover as a substitute teacher to investigate the conditions in California's public schools. I found that so cool.
Yeah.
Like, he
cared.
He was a hands-on politician. Yeah, he cared.
Absolutely.
In 1972, Ryan was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives as a Democrat, representing California's 11th congressional district, and his tenure in Congress was marked by his advocacy for social justice, human rights, and government transparency. And then, in November 1978, Congressman Leo Ryan decided to visit Jonestown. And this decision was motivated by numerous reports and allegations from concerned relatives of People's Temple members and from the defectors. These accounts painted a grim picture of life in Jonestown, marked by abuse, mistreatment, and severe restrictions on personal freedom. Basically, the idea was that the people were held there against their will, or many people were held there against their will, and he was like, well, let's go and have a look, right?
That's right.
He was determined to uncover the truth, and so he organized a fact-finding mission to the settlement, the remote settlement in Guyana. Congressman Ryan's delegation included a mix of journalists, some concerned relatives, and some aides. The group arrived in Guyana on 15th of November 1978, and upon arrival in the capital city of Georgetown, Ryan faced immediate challenges. The delegation had to navigate through bureaucratic hurdles and logistical issues, all while they were under the watchful eye of the People's Temple representatives. I think they were not even sure if they were allowed to step foot into Jonestown. Like, that was back and forth if they were even able to go there.
Right.
I think the first thing they visited was the People's Temple headquarters in Jonestown. And then, 17th of November, Ryan and his team were finally granted permission to enter Jonestown. And of course, this visit was cautiously staged by Jim Jones and his followers, who were eager to present a very positive image of their community. Upon arrival, Ryan and his delegation were greeted warmly with orchestrated performances and presentations that were designed to dispel any of the negative rumors.
Yeah, they had prepped everyone in the community very well. They'd given everybody scripted answers to all kinds of questions that they might be asked. However, the seemingly cordial reception masked underlying tensions. As Ryan and his team conducted interviews and observed the settlement, cracks began to appear in the carefully curated facade. Some residents bravely approached the delegation, discreetly slipping notes or making desperate pleas for help, revealing their desire to leave Jonestown and to escape the oppressive environment. As the visit progressed, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Jim Jones, already paranoid and fearful of losing control, became more agitated by the presence of the delegation and the emerging defectors. The initial welcome, turned into a charged and hostile environment as more residents came forward, seeking refuge with Ryan's group. On November 18, 1978, when Congressman Leo Ryan prepared to depart Jonestown, he was accompanied by about 15 defectors who had decided to leave the People's Temple. The exact number varies slightly in different accounts, but I think it's generally reported to be around 15 people.
Yeah, I think 15 or 16. And I urge everyone to watch and read more on the subject. For example, there is a documentary titled Paradise Lost, and obviously not the one about the West Memphis 3. In that documentary, there's one of the defectors who speaks about his experience. He had to make the very difficult decision to leave his young son behind. I think they wouldn't let him leave with the boy, and he figured it would be best if he would come back later and get the boy. He was sure that nothing would happen to the children, and unfortunately that's not what happened, and I can only imagine his heartbreak and how do you go on from that, right? It's horrible.
Yep. And he was also the one that warned the delegation about one of the people who said that they wanted to leave. It was a super devoted guy, and there was just no way that he was a defector, and he was right about it. Anyway, the delegation and 15 defectors leave, and they drive to the Port Kaituma airstrip. But there, as they're boarding the plane, suddenly this truck is arriving, coming sort of through the brush. And they don't know why until they see this massive gun. The delegation was being violently ambushed by members of the People's Temple security force. And also, the one who claimed to be a defector pulled a weapon and started shooting. The attack resulted in the tragic death of Congressman Ryan, 3 journalists, and one of the defectors. There's video footage of this attack because there was a member of the media with them to report back to taxpayers, I assume, about what they were finding and why they were there in the first place. So that Hulu documentary has all of the original footage. I can't remember if Paradise Lost does or not. And of course, this attack had been orchestrated by Jim Jones. And now back at the compound, news of the attack triggered the final, fatal White Night situation. Jones can be heard on the speakers all over the place, screaming, whipping people into a frenzy. He's telling them that some temple members have killed Congressman Ryan, and now everything is just over.
Oh, and he also claimed that he had nothing to do with it.
That's right.
He didn't orchestrate it.
That's right. He did say that. And he's telling them that now that this has happened, authorities are going to start to parachute into Jonestown any moment, and that they're all going to be arrested or shot on sight, and that the children would all be taken from their families and you'd never see them again. And so, clearly, the only thing that they could do as an ultimate act of rebellion was to go out on their own terms, which of course weren't their terms at all. It was Jim Jones's term. He orders everyone to come to the pavilion one last time. And the 50 to 60 armed guards of the temple security guards, they make sure that everybody goes to the pavilion. And now people are crying and they're pleading because they don't want to be there.
We know a lot of what was going on in those final hours at Jonestown from the so-called death tape. This whole time, Jim Jones was talking into his microphone. Like, he keeps talking and talking and talking. And it got recorded on tape. We hear, for example, someone asking if it's too late to move everyone to Russia. Remember, they were led to believe that the US government was after them and that Russia would maybe help them. But Jones replied, quote, "Looks like it's too late for Russia. They've started to kill. That's why I think it's too late for Russia." To which the person replies, "I'd say let's make an airlift to Russia. That's what I say." And Jones says, "How are you going to airlift to Russia?" And the person replies, "Well, I thought they said if we got in an emergency, they gave us a code and to let them know." And Jones says, "No, they didn't. They gave us a code that they'd let us know, not us creating an issue for them. They said if they saw the country coming down, they'd give us a code." End quote.
It's all nonsense.
I think in the beginning when they moved to Guyana, he was probably telling them that they're under the Russian protection and they're going to take care of them. And now he's like turning it around that Russia wanted help from Jim Jones.
Exactly.
Which is...
Yeah.
Annie and I were actually debating to include some of the parts of the tapes here, but it doesn't feel right. It's just all it's so horrible, and it's horrendous enough to just talk about it. The tapes are out there, the transcripts are available, but I don't think we need to include them here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's on the tapes. You can, and listen, we've both listened to them. We're not saying don't listen to them, just it's up to you if you want to go there or not, because on the tapes, you can hear people begging and screaming and pleading for their lives, pleading for the lives of their children. It's fucking horrifying. Yeah. There's no real reason to play it. It's not like we're analyzing whether or not we think what they're saying is true. It's just all terrible. No. And so big barrels were brought out and they filled them with water and then some kind of grape-flavored drink. It's the infamous Kool-Aid drink, which we think was actually a mix of Flavor-Aid and Kool-Aid, but honestly, it doesn't matter. They mixed cyanide and sedatives into the drink, and then they brought out the children, 300 children, who were the first to die. The same people who had taken care of those children in the nurseries and in school and in kindergarten and babysitting them because it takes a fucking village, am I right? They are now filling syringes and squirting deadly liquid into the mouths of babes.
Can I just interrupt real quick again? Sorry.
Yeah, please.
But this is something interesting. When the children were brought out, we can hear Jim Jones saying, quote, "Mother, mother, mother, please, mother, please, 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 don't do this, don't do this. Lay down your life with your child, but don't do this," end quote. Mm-hmm. And this is a moment on the tape that is highly debated.
That was the only part I wondered if we should actually play.
Yeah, I also think it's the most famous part of the tapes, right? Who is he addressing here? So many think he was talking to his wife, Marceline, who, remember, everyone referred to as mother. This is also Stephen Jones, the biological son of Marceline and Jim Jones. Mm-hmm. It's his take on it, I think, that his mother tried to protect the children and had to be restrained.
Yeah.
And that only after all the children were dead, she took the poison voluntarily. Others think that he was addressing another woman, a mother trying to protect her child, a random woman, and that Marceline was actually quite busy helping to hand out the poison. Some think they can even hear Marceline on the tape instructing others to bring the children or things like this. I don't know. I'm so torn. It could be both. I used to think that it must be some other mother because he says, "Lay down your life with your child." But then again, all the children in Jonestown were raised by the community and kind of everyone's children. So, and we know he talks kind of irrationally.
Right. But there's also that aspect of things where, because I think this came up also with the Oneida community, where it's all well and good to have your child like raised by a village. But I don't think anything can provoke that sort of mama bear, for lack of a better term, feelings about protecting your children. Like, I think when it's your child, I think there isn't much you would.
But I mean that if he said your child, because I think he would consider all the children being Marceline's children.
Right. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I keep going back and forth on Marceline anyway and her involvement. I know she started out as someone who just wanted to take care of less fortunate, less privileged members of society. But she was also one of Jim Jones' biggest enablers. She was there for decades with him. I read about her involvement in the fake cancer healings and the temple, for example. So she knew what was going on. I think she's a very complex figure, that's for sure.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's just so hard to know how much of a victim she was. Like, how much was she just completely brainwashed by her husband? Or even if she was all bad news on her own. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that the overwhelming majority of mothers and fathers there did not want to die, and they did not want their children to die. It's horrifying. Yeah, it's just horrifying. And so after the children were dead, the adults then lined up to drink the poison-laced concoction. And of course, they're doing this under armed guards surrounding the pavilion. If you think that cyanide is going to give you a quick and merciful death, think again. It is a fast-acting poison, but depending on the ingested or inhaled amount, it can take minutes to hours for a person to die. Cyanide binds to enzymes involved in cellular respiration in the mitochondria of cells. This prevents cells from utilizing oxygen, which leads to cellular hypoxia, which is a lack of oxygen. Initial symptoms of cyanide poisoning may include rapid breathing, headache, confusion, nausea, and dizziness. As cyanide levels increase, symptoms progress to seizures, loss of consciousness, cardiac arrest, and respiratory failure. If you've seen the Hulu documentary, I know you haven't had a chance to yet, Johanna, there's an interview with a man who survived. And he was a young man at the time, and he talks about coming across his wife and baby and how his wife was absolutely distraught because their baby was dying and dying horribly, like I think seizing in her arms and all kinds, just horrific. And he says how terrible it was to see his baby dying like that and knowing that there was like nothing he could do. And then he talks about the realization that suddenly he realizes his wife is exhibiting the same symptoms and she is also dying and she's begging him to save them. And there is just nothing that he can do. It's just, I can't even, I don't want to imagine it. Like, it's just so far beyond. And now there are just people dying everywhere. And all the while, Jim Jones won't shut the fuck up. He's just screaming and yelling and talking into this microphone nonstop. And I know you very likely want to know how Jim Jones himself died, so prepare to be disappointed, because he did not die by consuming the same poison drink he forced the majority of his followers to consume. Instead, he died of a gunshot wound to the head. The circumstances surrounding his death are still debated and unclear, but it's believed he probably ordered someone to shoot him or he shot himself.
Which figures, because I think he just saw how everyone else suffered and didn't want to go through that.
Oh yeah, he was a total coward. He was like, drink this, and then watched what happened and was like, nope, not for me, thanks.
There's also some who believe that maybe someone got mad and shot him, but I don't
think so.
It's possible, but I really think that his personal nurse, well, we're going to talk about it in a second.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was a coward. His body was found next to his chair at the pavilion. His body was cremated and his ashes were scattered in the Atlantic Ocean, which is way too poetic and beautiful a place for him to have earned a rest.
Yeah. Some of Jim Jones' children died that day in Jonestown as well, but not all of them. Also, I think he might have had more biological children with other women, but I don't think we know all the details here. At least I'm not very informed on that. But 3 of his sons, including his biological son Stephen, they were away from Jonestown that day with other members of the community to participate at a basketball tournament. Of course, the Jonestown story entails many theories, one of them being that the young men, the whole basketball team, were sent to Georgetown as kind of a squad team to murder Congressman Ryan, I guess. But I think that's highly speculative.
They were just a group from Jonestown, right? Playing basketball with a group from...
Yeah.
There was nothing crazy or nefarious about it. It was just there was a group of kids that played basketball and they were playing another team in Georgetown.
Exactly. Yeah. We could honestly fill a whole other episode talking about all the rumors and speculations and conspiracy theories that obviously come with the territory. I might be naive, but I think they were really just there to play basketball and they stayed at the People's Temple House in Georgetown. There, they were informed about the shooting and the White Knight alert, I think via radio. And then apparently the brothers rushed to the U.S. Embassy in Georgetown. Well, they tried. They wanted to alert authorities about the violence that was happening and the situation unfolding in Jonestown. However, their efforts to seek assistance were met with resistance. The Guyanese soldiers guarding the embassy, they were already on high alert to the events at the airstrip. They had already been informed about that and they refused to allow them entry. And the brothers faced a daunting reality. They were unable to immediately get help for their community back in Jonestown.
And I can't blame the people, the Guyanese authorities, because, I mean, they thought they were letting in a nice group of American socialist pacifists who were into equality and interested in, starting a farm.
I mean, they tried to get into the U.S. Embassy and they were not allowed to get into the U.S. Embassy because obviously the U.S. Embassy would have also thought they came to attack them.
They couldn't be trusted. Yeah, of course.
In the immediate aftermath of the mass poisoning in Jonestown, it took some time for the authorities to reach the remote settlement. They would only arrive the next morning. And also, let's not forget the survivors at the airstrip because they too had to wait the whole night until help would finally arrive. It's actually a miracle that not more of them died during that night out there, as some of them were severely injured. And of course, they also spent the whole night fearing for more attackers to return. The Guyanese officials were the first to respond, arriving at Jonestown on the morning of 19th of November. And what they discovered was It must have been a scene of unimaginable horror because there were over 900 bodies scattered throughout the compound, the majority having succumbed to the cyanide-laced drink. I think the only two not dying of the poison but by gunshot wounds were Jim Jones and his personal nurse, and that's why many believe that the nurse first was ordered to shoot Jim Jones and then shot herself.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to do it if you're also like a religious person, because then you've taken off the sin. He's the worst.
The authorities were overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the tragedy, and the scene was chaotic. The bodies were lying in rows. Many were holding each other in their final moments. And at first, when authorities counted the bodies, there were like 400 people missing. And I read that they thought that these people must have fled into the jungle. And it's true, some managed to flee into the jungle, some before they were forced to take the poison, some unfortunately after. These people would die out there. But it wasn't as many as 400 people, nowhere near. It was way, way, way less. And only after a while, the first responders realized that they had miscounted the bodies, because many times there were bodies lying under bodies, and so they were not able to see them right from the start, which is horrible to think about. There are also speculations. Some think that maybe some of the bodies had been staged after their death because so many were lying in really neat rows next to each other. And the initial task for the authorities was to secure the site and to begin the grim process of identifying the victims. US military personnel along with Guyanese forces were called in to assist. The dense jungle and remote location made the operation really challenging, but the cooperation between the US and Guyana, the Guyanese authorities, was crucial in managing everything that came with it. Obviously, simultaneously, investigations began into how such a tragedy could have occurred. The focus was not only on the mass suicide/murder, it's more of a mass murder in my opinion, itself, but also on the preceding events, including the ambush, obviously, at Port Kaituma airstrip that claimed the lives of Congressman Leo Ryan and the others. And the authorities sought to piece together the timeline, and they tried to understand the motivations behind Jim Jones's final fatal decisions. And the good thing was that there were so many video and audio tapes found at the compound, I think well over 900, and these tapes definitely helped to piece the pieces together.
Yeah, teams worked tirelessly to recover and transport the bodies. Many of the victims were eventually flown to the United States for identification and burial. This process was painstaking and emotionally taxing for all involved, particularly for the families of the victims who awaited news of their loved ones.
Can you imagine, like for months, you've been worried sick about your loved ones, you were hoping you could get them out of there, and then you get the news about how it all ended and about what has happened to your family members and friends?
It's awful. And again, in the Hulu documentary, when they're talking to the biological child of Jones, he says, you know, as bad as things were, he never in a million years saw this coming. And if we believe him, and I don't see any reason not to, I think it was a huge shock to a lot of people. And obviously he's going to have blinkers on a bit because of his own, you know, being raised in a cult. And there's so much news coverage, I think it was almost impossible for people to avoid the videos and photo evidence. One of the Hellions wrote us that he remembered seeing footage that was taken via helicopter. This is also in that Hulu video, filming down on the compound, and there are just bodies everywhere. Yeah, they show that in the Hulu special, and they talk about how from high up it looked like confetti on the ground, but it was the clothes of all the dead who were just everywhere, all over the place. The scale of the tragedy combined with the details of the mass suicide/murder left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness. Discussions about cult dynamics, psychological manipulation, and the responsibilities of religious and political leaders were reignited in the wake of Jonestown. In the years that followed, efforts were made to remember and honor the victims of Jonestown. Memorials were established, and survivors shared their stories to ensure that the lessons of Jonestown would not be forgotten. The tragedy serves as a stark reminder of the dangers posed by charismatic leaders who wield unchecked power over their followers. In total, 918 people died in Jonestown, including 304 under the age of 18. Also, most of Jim Jones's children, his wife, and his mother, Lynetta. And yes, of course, there were survivors. To quote jonestown.sdsu.edu, quote, "The number of survivors depends on one's definition of survivor. Generally, on this website, we identify survivors as members of the People's Temple who were in or near Guyana on November 18th and who survived the death. That is not an attempt to minimize the anguish and struggles which the Temple members in California felt upon hearing of the deaths in Guyana. Rather, that is a much larger, less quantifiable number beyond our ability to determine. With that in mind, we can identify 87 Temple members who survived. They include 36 people who began their day in Jonestown, including 16 defectors, including Larry Layton, who posed as a defector, who accompanied Leo Ryan's congressional party from Jonestown and who came under attack at the airstrip. 11 Jonestown residents in a party led by Richard Clark, who left the community on the morning of 18th of November and walked to Matthews Ridge.
I think their excuse to leave the compound was that they wanted to go for a picnic, and that's how they escaped.
That's right, and they hid in the jungle.
And they didn't even know what was going to happen, yeah.
Most of the remaining survivors were Temple members in Georgetown. Some were part of the group's logistical base in Guyana's capital, some were in the city for business or medical reasons, and some were there to participate in that basketball tournament, end quote. Another survivor was Hyacinth Thrash.
Which is such a beautiful name. How beautiful is the name Hyacinth?
It's beautiful. So this is how she described the events in an interview she gave to the Indy Star. Quote, "Jones was persuasive, and he also had armed guards. His followers drank the poison, but Hyacinth did not. She hid under her bed. Quote, I remember those babies marching past our place with little paper hats on, wearing sandals, sunsuits, and matching shorts and tops," she told the Star in 1995. "It's enough to make you scream your lungs out thinking of all those babies dead." She said she either fell asleep or passed out. She woke the next morning to the carnage, the dead bodies of everyone she knew, her sister included. Hyacinth remained in Jonestown among the dead, alone, all day. Rescue came the next day. She is often said to be the only survivor of Jonestown, though an early Associated Press report said there was a second person found alive there, 79-year-old Grover Cleveland Davis. Davis, who was hard of hearing, reportedly had slept through the death assembly, but he died the following year. Thrash returned to Indianapolis in 1982 and lived out her days at Mount Zion Geriatric Center on Graceland Avenue. She gave media interviews, mostly on anniversaries of the tragedy. She died in 1995 at age 90. It did not take long for her to forgive Jim Jones. By the 10th anniversary of his Holocaust, she told a reporter, quote, "I just don't feel nothing toward him now, no bitterness toward him. I was at times, but I prayed to the Lord because you can't hate nobody, so I was healed of that," end quote.
You know what? I get that. She didn't want the bitterness to ruin her life, and I think it's so important to find a way to live on after experiencing tragedies in general. And I think we can all agree that this is a level of trauma none of us can even begin to comprehend. Like, imagine you're coming out of your hut and you see 900 bodies, and then you have to stay there alone with all these bodies until help arrives the next morning.
Yeah, it's awful. And there's a saying that, you know, when you hate someone, if you have a grudge, if you have bitterness inside you about a situation, like those feelings are like taking poison and hoping someone else dies, right? Because that kind of hate just eats you, it withers you from within. And I totally get that need to let it go and move forward.
I think the compound, or what is left of the buildings, is by now completely overgrown. I don't think they did anything there. I've seen photos, but they're very old already, and I'm not even sure there's anything left at this time.
The jungle's taking it back.
Yeah, and it was almost, all of it was wood.
Yeah.
So it must have rotten away.
Oh,
right?
yeah. I mean, you look at the way if you have a parcel of land in Florida that you leave unattended for a few years, it's basically uninhabitable. So imagine how much so that would be the case in Guyana.
Annie, when we talked after recording episode 2, you made an absolute excellent point, because I had mentioned that I hate how flippant people are using Jonestown, and it has kind of turned into a joke.
Mm-hmm.
And you said you think many people might think it's similar to Heaven's Gate mass suicide, where 38 followers of Marshall Applewhite and he himself committed suicide because they believed they could transform to a higher extraterrestrial being to live inside a UFO or
That's
something
right.
like that.
Yeah. The aliens would collect
I'm not
their
super
souls.
well informed when it comes to Heaven's Gate.
I'm not either, actually. I don't know if that's too soon or if that's something that we should look into for a future, not this year, next year maybe. Like one cult a year is enough.
Yeah, it's enough. Anyway, you said that probably many people think that Jonestown was very similar, that it was adults who did this absolutely voluntarily. And of course, also the Heaven's Gate people were victims, brainwashed into a very obscure belief system. But I think you made an interesting point there. Jonestown and Jim Jones himself turned into this kind of pop culture phenomenon.
Yeah.
There even exists Jim Jones merch. I saw a mug one time with Jim Jones on it and the words "drink up." And I hate to admit it, it made me chuckle as a first reaction.
Yep.
I saw a shirt with a Kool-Aid jug on it saying, "Ask me about my cult." But I think if people would really know how all of this went down, they would maybe show a bit more respect. Or maybe not, because every year for Christmas we see the serial killer ornaments posted on various social media platforms, and maybe it's just how people are.
I know, it's like the people that get the Ted Bundy bite marks. If you're one of these
please,
people,
don't even get me started.
Maybe talk to a professional about your life, something. That's not good. That's not healthy. But yeah, I felt really bad when we looked more into this for this episode, because I've also seen quite a few Kool-Aid memes that have made me laugh. And I'm sure I've shared them myself. I've also been that person who's like, it wasn't Kool-Aid, it was Flavor Aid. And I'm in no way saying that the followers of Applewhite deserve to die. Of course, I'm not saying that. But I do think that a lot of people, myself included, thought that in both of these cases, the cult members chose to die willingly and chose to drink the Kool-Aid. I don't think a lot of people, I understand that this wasn't actually a choice for most of them. I don't know how willingly Heaven's Gate participated. I think that was an applesauce and Quaaludes kind of a situation. But because we do know now that the majority at Jonestown were not willingly drinking the Kool-Aid. And even if they did, it just feels shitty to make fun of innocent people who are sincerely trying to make the world like a better, more loving place and were poisoned by an asshole like Jim Jones. You know what I mean? It's kind of how I feel about the McDonald's hot coffee case. Yeah. It's like, oh, actually, that woman deserved so much more money than she got from McDonald's. It's just bad. Also,
I know that people try to work through these kind of events with humor.
Oh, of course.
Because there's no way to understand it, so you have to kind of try to laugh about it.
I get it. I joke about everything. I just think in this case, it's good to know what the actual story is and then decide for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know.
There are many interesting points that will be open to discussion, like, for example, talking about the power of a charismatic leadership, like how Jim Jones was able to command this unwavering loyalty from his followers, how he was able to lead them to this remote location in the jungle in Guyana. Some people have the ability to manipulate and control other people because they are so charismatic.
That's right.
And I think Jonestown is a stark reminder of how individuals can be influenced and led into extreme actions if there is a compelling leader.
Absolutely. It's amazing what people can talk you into doing.
Yeah, it's scary to think about because everybody thinks it couldn't happen to me.
Right. And when they've been preying on fear, it could happen to anybody.
And I think he knew exactly why he chose this remote location, not only because then it would have been harder for authorities to get there, but also because there he had total control over them. They were isolated there.
Yeah. That's right. There was no authorities to tell him no.
Yeah, they were constantly watched. They were reprimanded for everything they did wrong, or if they weren't super loyal, or if their answers when they were questioned wasn't immediately what he wanted to hear, these kind of things. I think it's important to understand that maintaining connections with people who are in these kind of situations is so important.
Absolutely.
and that you should always be wary of groups that try to isolate its members, especially if they try to isolate you from family, loved ones, friends.
Yeah, anybody in your life trying to do that does not have your best interests at heart. That never goes somewhere good, whether it's a partner or a church or whatever it is. It's just not. And, the psychological tactics that were used by Jim Jones were very sophisticated and manipulative, from loyalty tests to the installation of fear through constant, repeated threat by external enemies. There was a very, very carefully crafted culture of fear and obedience within the group. And the White Knights served as rehearsals for mass suicide that were just extreme manifestations of this control. And understanding these methods is crucial to recognizing and resisting similar patterns when they appear in other contexts. And I'm sure with those White Knights, I don't think it's a coincidence that members reported being given poison to drink on more than one occasion, but it wasn't actually poison. It was just a test to see if they would take it. So now your guard is down and more people will take it willingly, thinking again that it's just going to be a fake again.
And nothing can pull a group together better than having a common outside enemy.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, it's just so sad. As we said before, these people were drawn to the community out of desire for social justice, desire for equality. They wanted to belong somewhere, and Jim Jones exploited all these very noble aspirations for his own personal gain. And it just highlights how vulnerable individuals are who seek purpose, who seek a community, who seek a place where they belong, and how they can be manipulated. And I think it really emphasizes the need of critical thinking and skepticism, especially when dealing with groups or leaders who promise like this great life, this utopia, and everything will be so wonderful.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I think also it doesn't even need to be, you don't even necessarily need to have like shared good in common. Like you were saying, it's really more the shared fear of the, perceived or imagined bad thing. These just lies that you hear over and over. But if you hear them often enough, you think they're true.
It works like a charm.
Yep. The tragedy in Jonestown also raised questions about the role of the media and authorities in recognizing and responding to warning signs. Reports of abuse and misconduct within the People's Temple surfaced well before the mass suicide, yet timely intervention never happened. This underscores the importance of vigilance and proactive measures when dealing with potentially dangerous groups.
Yeah, like last week when we told about Laura's grandfather who tried to do something, who wrote a letter, who said, hey, there's this leader and he has these armed guards and there is something fishy going on, and he takes belongings of his church members and so on and so on. And it was all like, yeah, well. Yeah.
And I think part of that is we have a kind of complicated, it shouldn't be complicated. There's supposed to be a separation of church and state in the United States. And so that could create an issue because not that the police can't investigate things happening in churches, but for the most part, people try to stay out of other people's sort of business, if that makes sense. Like the fact that it was in the auspices of a church would make it harder for outsiders to investigate. And in some ways, they don't have to play by the same rules as other organizations do. They have tax exemptions, which is great if you're coaxing people in to give you all their worldly possessions.
You used to be a Catholic, I'm a Catholic, and we all know what went down in the Catholic Church and how they covered everything up.
Oh, yeah.
People were just sent to the Vatican, sent to other communities, and that was it.
They just dealt with it internally. No problem here.
And it was decades and decades and decades and so many victims.
And so many people will never pay. But they know who they are.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's a conversation for another day. I have a lot of thoughts on that whole thing.
Definitely.
But yeah.
I think ultimately when talking about Jonestown and making these jokes, and maybe we could, some of our listeners will maybe start to think a little bit different now. Because, I mean, let's face it, over 900 lives were taken, were lost.
Mm-hmm.
And they are all representing a personal story, a story of hope, of belief. And ultimately, it's all betrayal.
Yeah, all betrayal. That's right. That's right. You hate to see something like this having to happen in order for a cult to be broken up.
all that's left from me to say is if you found these 4 episodes interesting, please read and watch more on the topic. There's so much more we had to gloss over. I personally can recommend the books The Road to Jonestown, Jim Jones and the People's Temple by Jeff Ginn. The book And Then They Were Gone, Teenagers of People's Temple from High School to Jonestown by Judy Babeler, I think is it pronounced, and Ron Cabral. And Stories from Jonestown by Lee Fondakovsky.
Yeah, there's a lot of information out there. If you want more, it would be impossible to cover everything. There's
too much.
Too much.
Did you enjoy the Hulu documentary?
I did. I thought it was good. It was a lot of archival footage. It starts with the congressmen and staff going in and why they were going in. So it pretty much just covers the massacre, and it's devastating. Yeah. The other thing is Jim Jones, I don't even know how to put into words the negative feelings about him. He's like a wannabe Elvis vibe. Do you know what I mean? He's got this greasy, wannabe sexy Elvis, but he's not.
The glasses,
the sideburn, the hair.
I was laughing. Somebody said the moment he found the 70s porn glasses and 70s geography teacher haircut or something like this, and it was just spot on. Spot on.
He reminded me of like wannabe Elvis, and the way he preaches, it is exactly like imagine textbook fake faith healer.
Yeah.
And Jesus, he puts his hands on you. Like there's too many.
Yeah.
It's like that time I went on a blind date with a guy that was a sports announcer, and he was super nice, but he talked like this. It never stopped the whole time. This steak is tremendous. Like, wow. Nope.
Do you think he wore the sunglasses because of his drug abuse?
Maybe.
Because that was always
I think he wore the sunglasses because he thought he looked cool. Well, also, if you can't see what someone's eyes are doing, it's easier to deceive them. It's where so many poker players wear glasses. Not my husband. He doesn't need to wear glasses. He's good at poker.
And the best poker players wear mirrored glasses.
That's right. The whole thing was it's just awful. It's so awful. We can chat about this. This will be our next month's, episode.
I have so much more. I have articles. There's also a book called Raven. I haven't read it yet, but I read a discussion online about the book, and apparently there is a part where they talk about apparently Jim Jones and Marcel in the 60s had a chimpanzee or some other ape.
Oh, God.
And the ape died, and it was poisoned, and Jim Jones said that the neighbor poisoned the ape, but the discussion was, could it have been that it was kind of them testing out ways to
kill
poison?
People.
Yeah. Also, the sheer amount of cyanide they had at the compound.
Where did they even get all that cyanide? I guess rat poison. It was probably used as as how they justified it.
I think they just kind of collected for years and years the medical supplies.
Yeah.
I know that there is, you can find the answer to that on the Jonestown SD. What's the name? The page. There's a frequently asked questions, and it's there. And I forgot what the reply was, but I think it was something like they collected the cyanide over years to have this amount even available to them.
Just be careful. Be careful you're not in a cult, everybody.
Yeah, maybe we should do an episode about signs of, these are the signs you're in a cult.
Yeah.
Maybe that would be interesting.
It probably would be. All right. Do you have anything good this week? Anything terrible? You want to just bitch about something that really annoys you instead of telling about something good?
No, everything is just comfortable at the moment. I don't know. There's nothing.
That's good.
Did I watch something good? Let me think. Oh yeah, I watched Poor Things.
Oh, did you like it? Paul watched it and wasn't sure if I should watch it or not. Oh, you did?
But I have to say I love all the Lanthimos movies, like Dogtooth and especially The Lobster. I love The Lobster. Poor Things is, I know a lot of people have kind of a problem with her basically having the brain of a child, and she's constantly, she's doing sex work and kind of taken advantage of by men. I see that, but it's kind of it's complex, I think. It's a lot about the losing of the naivety and losing this kind of sense of wonder as a child. And it's very multi-layered, but I really enjoyed it. I think it looked beautiful. Like the visuals are beautiful, beautiful. I love Emma Stone in the Lanthimos pictures is always great, but she was born to play this somehow. I don't know. She really made it work. I really enjoyed it.
That's awesome. You know what Emma Stone movie I kept thinking about with Jim Jones and the Rainbow Family was Easy A. Have you seen Easy A?
No.
Oh, if you just want to watch something kind of light-ish, there's just such a funny story. And she has a younger adopted brother who's Black, and then her parents, and they're all sitting at the breakfast table or whatever, eating a meal. And the dad looks at the son and is like, "Where are you from again?" It's just so funny. And it's like, wait, I'm adopted? It's like because that's how my family joke. My sister made me a birthday cake once that said "You're adopted" on it. And it and I just thought it was really, really funny. It's just, yeah, that's another
Emma. About it. I'm gonna look it up.
Yeah. It's a nod to the Scarlet Letter and sort of female sexual empowerment in high school, sort of, I guess. You'll like it, I think. I like Emma Stone very much. Yeah.
I like her too.
But the family in Easy A, Paul and I used to laugh all the time. Like, that's the kind of parents we would be. Yeah, you'll see. It's fun. It's a fun movie.
Awesome. All right. I think that's it for this week.
That's it.
If you enjoyed this episode or any of our other episodes, please do us the huge favor. Go to your podcast app and see if you can leave us a rating and or review. Also, on Spotify, you can answer the question apparently under each episode. Did you enjoy this episode? So you can write something there as well.
I love that. And we can see it. It doesn't let us respond back, though.
No.
Like, why can't we reply? That's annoying. But yeah, Spotify, thanks. And IMDb. I think you can leave reviews on IMDb.
Yes, also.
When you take the time to leave us a review, it just means so much. It really does. Patreon, you can go to patreon.com and search Fresh Hell Podcast, and you will find the different levels you can support us with. We have been doing sort of chats lately about different topics and like what our thoughts are, and topics that either we've covered and we're just having an after the show chat, or topics we would never cover. If that makes sense.
Also about Patreon, next week I will send out the newest Murder Tier special merch. All of the Murder Tier patrons that are registered now will get it, will receive it. Also the ones who've been Murder Tier patrons for a longer time already. It's going to change every year, but all the Murder Tiers are always going to get this special item. And yes, it's going to be on your way next week.
Yeah, each summer we'll come out with a new thing. It'll be good.
We have a new merch store. Check that one out. You find the link on our webpage, freshhellpodcast.com.
Please remember to send us your fun stories. Like, just let us know. Ghost story, connection to a killer story, whatever it is, and let us know how you want to be known.
All right. I think that's it. Please tell all your pets we said hi, hug them, cuddle them, treat them nicely. Please check them for ticks. I just removed last week 8 ticks from Leela, and she has such thick hair, and it was almost impossible to find them. They were teeny tiny. It's horrible at the moment. It's horrible.
It's so gross.
Please don't forget, it's still hot in most places. I mean, summer just is beginning, actually. Don't leave them in your car unless you have kind of,
climate control. Yeah. You can leave the air conditioning running.
Don't leave them outside in the sun. Keep them inside. Give them water. Also, water for all the animals, for all the birds, everyone. Everyone needs water. And be kind to all the animals. Be kind to other humans. And most important of all, be kind to yourself. I know it's hard, but you deserve it.
That's true. And if you're going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
Bye.